sterile scent of disinfectant hung heavy in the hospital corridor as the emergency lights flashed red. Tieu Lac lay on the narrow bed, her face as pale as the white sheets beneath her. Her breathing was shallow, labored, each inhale a fragile thread threatening to snap. Quan sat beside her, one hand wrapped tightly around hers, the other gently resting on her swollen belly. He hadn't moved for hours. His eyes, usually sharp and commanding, were now raw with fear. Suddenly, Tieu Lac's body convulsed. A soft, pained gasp escaped her lips. "Quan, it hurts. So much." Her fingers dug into his palm as a dark crimson stain began to bloom across the sheets. Blood. Fresh and terrifying. "Lac!" Quan's voice cracked like thunder in the quiet room. He shot to his feet, still clutching her hand as if letting go would make her disappear. "Doctor! Nurse! She's bleeding again! Hurry!" Alarms blared. Footsteps pounded down the hallway. Medical staff rushed in, their faces tense with urgency. "Severe hemorrhage! Prepare the operating room! Now!" Tieu Lac's eyes, wide with terror, locked onto Quan's. Tears slipped down her temples. "Quan, our baby. I'm scared. I don't want to lose our child." Quan leaned down until their foreheads touched, his breath trembling against her skin. He cupped her face with both hands, thumbs brushing away her tears with infinite tenderness. "Shh. Look at me, lass. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." His voice was low, steady, yet thick with emotion. "You and our baby will be okay. You have to be. I need you. I need both of you more than anything in this world." He pressed his lips to her forehead, then to her closed eyelids, tasting the salt of her tears. The kiss was soft, desperate, a silent vow. "I love you, Lac. I love you so much it hurts. Don't leave me. Please, fight for me. Fight for our little one." Tieu Lac's weak fingers tightened around his shirt. "I love you too, Quan." Before she could say more, the medical team began wheeling her bed toward the operating room. Their hands remained clasped until the very last second, fingers slipping apart only when the cold metal doors swung shut between them. Quan stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the closed doors. The world narrowed to the sound of his own heartbeat, wild, frantic, breaking. He slammed his fist into the wall, once, twice. Blood trickled from his knuckles, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the storm tearing through his chest. He sank to his knees, forehead pressed against the cold tiles. "Save them. Please save my wife and our child. I'll give anything, everything." Hours dragged on like centuries. Quan remained on that hard plastic chair, eyes fixed on the operating room door. His clothes were stained with dried blood, hers and now his own. He didn't care. Around midnight, the door finally opened. The surgeon stepped out, mask pulled down, exhaustion etched on her face. "The surgery is over. We managed to stop the bleeding. Both mother and baby are stable for now. But the next 24 hours are critical." Quan exhaled shakily, relief flooding him so intensely his knees nearly buckled. He bowed deeply. "Thank you. Thank you." He was allowed a brief moment inside the recovery room. Tieu Lac lay unconscious, surrounded by monitors and IV lines. Her face was still unnaturally pale, but she was breathing on her own. Quan pulled a chair close and took her hand again. He brought it to his lips, kissing each knuckle with reverent care. "You did it, my love," he whispered, voice hoarse. "You fought so hard. Rest now. I'm here. I'll always be here." Dawn crept through the blinds when Tieu Lac's mother, Mrs. Lan, arrived. She had traveled through the night after receiving the frantic call from the village. The moment she saw Quan, disheveled, bloodied knuckles, eyes hollow with worry, her own eyes filled with tears. "Quan, my son." She walked over and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Quan looked up, his voice cracking. "Mother, I failed. I couldn't protect her. Mrs. Lan shook her head, pulling him into a motherly embrace. You did everything you could. Lac is strong, just like you. Now we wait together. For her, for the baby. They sat side by side through the long morning, Mrs. Lan sharing quiet stories of Tieu Lac's childhood, how she used to run through the rice fields with wildflowers in her hair, how she always protected the smaller children in the village. Each memory was a small thread of warmth in the cold hospital air. By late afternoon, Tieu Lac finally stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open. Quan? He was at her side in an instant, leaning over her with such tenderness it made Mrs. Lan smile through her tears from the doorway. I'm here, my love. Quan's voice was soft, almost reverent. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, then leaned down to press a lingering kiss to her temple. You scared me, more than anything I've ever faced. Tieu Lac's hand moved weakly to her belly. The baby? Still with us, Quan said, his voice thick. He placed his large hand over hers on her stomach. Our little fighter, just like their mother. Tears slipped from the corners of her eyes. I heard you before the surgery. Every word. Quan's breath hitched. He rested his forehead against hers again, their noses brushing. Then you know how much I mean it. You are my entire world, Lac. Not the old company, not the money, not anything else. Just you, and this child growing inside you. I would trade every breath I have left if it meant keeping you both safe. I know, she whispered, a faint smile touching her lips, and I love you for it. More than I can ever say. He kissed her then, slow, deep, and full of all the fear and relief he had carried through the night. It was a kiss that spoke of promises, of second chances, of a love forged stronger in the fire of near loss. Mrs. Lan quietly stepped out, giving them the privacy they needed. For the next few days, Quan barely left her side. He fed her, helped her sit up, massaged her aching shoulders, and spoke to their unborn child every evening in that low, soothing voice Tieu Lac had come to cherish. One quiet evening, as golden sunlight filtered through the window, Tieu Lac rested her head on Quan's shoulder while he sat on the edge of the bed. Quan, she murmured, tracing slow circles on the back of his hand. When we go home, will you rebuild the gourd trellis with me? The one we had before the fire? He smiled softly, turning to kiss the top of her head. I'll build it stronger than before, and every evening I'll sit with you under it. We'll watch our child grow, just like those young gourds, slowly, surely, full of promise. Tieu Lac tilted her face up, eyes shining with quiet joy. Promise me something else. Anything. Promise you'll let me love you back just as fiercely. No more carrying everything alone. We're in this together, from now on. Quan's throat tightened. He cupped her cheek, thumb stroking her skin with infinite gentleness. I promise. You've taught me what real strength is, Lac. It's not standing alone. It's standing beside you. Their lips met again, soft and lingering, a silent reaffirmation of the bond that had carried them through hell and back. But peace, it seemed, was not meant to last. On the fifth day, the door to the room opened slowly. Tieu Lac's brother stood there, gaunt, eyes sunken, clothes rumpled. He looked like a man who had walked through fire and lost everything. He took one look at his sister lying in the hospital bed, then at Quan, and his face crumpled. Without a word, he dropped to his knees in the middle of the room. Lac. Quan. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. His voice broke into sobs. It wasn't just the debt. I worked with them. I told them where to find us. I thought if they scared you a little, you'd pay. I never thought Lac would get hurt. Please, forgive me. The air in the room turned ice cold. Quan rose slowly, every muscle coiled with rage. His hands clenched into fists so tight the knuckles turned white. You used your own sister as bait? His voice was dangerously low. You almost killed her. You almost killed our child. He took a step forward. Tieu Lac's brother flinched but didn't rise. Quan's fist flew up. Quan, stop! Tieu Lac's weak cry cut through the tension like a blade. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they wrapped around Quan's wrist. Please, don't. He's still my brother. The only family I have left besides you and our baby. I can't lose him too. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it held all the quiet strength Quan had fallen in love with. Quan stood frozen, chest heaving. The fury in his eyes warred with the love he saw in his wife's gaze. Slowly, painfully, he lowered his arm. He turned away, jaw tight, struggling to contain the storm inside him. That night, after the nurses had dimmed the lights and Mrs. Lan had gone to rest in the waiting area, Quan lay carefully beside Tieu Lac on the narrow hospital bed. He held her close, one arm protectively around her waist, careful not to press on her belly. Tieu Lac nestled against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Quan, she whispered into the quiet darkness. I know you're angry. I know what he did was unforgivable, but hatred, it poisons everything. I don't want our child to grow up seeing their father carry that weight. She took his hand and guided it to her belly, where their baby gave a faint fluttering kick, as if agreeing. I want our home to be filled with love, with forgiveness. Not because he deserves it, but because we deserve peace. Because you and I deserve to raise this child in light, not shadow. Quan was silent for a long moment. Then he exhaled shakily, burying his face in her hair. You always see the good in people, even when I can't. His voice was rough with emotion. I'm so angry, Las, but for you, for our baby, I will try. I will try to forgive. He tilted her chin up gently, eyes searching hers in the dim light. You are the kindest, strongest woman I've ever known. Every day you teach me how to be better, how to love deeper. He kissed her then, slowly, deeply, pouring every ounce of his conflicted heart into that single touch. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. I'll use the last piece of land we have left. I'll sell it to pay part of the debt. In exchange, he must cut all ties with those people and come back to the village to help us rebuild. That's the only way. Tieu Lac smiled through fresh tears, her fingers threading through his hair. Thank you, my love. Quan pulled her closer, wrapping her in his arms as if she were the most precious thing in existence. No, thank you for teaching me that love is stronger than anger, for giving me a reason to choose mercy. In the quiet of the hospital room, with monitors beeping softly and their unborn child nestled safely between them, Quan and Tieu Lac held each other through the night. Two hearts healing, one promise at a time. The days that followed were a delicate balance between healing and tension. Tieu Lac grew stronger with each passing sunrise, though her movements remained slow and careful. Quan never left her side for long. He slept on the narrow couch beside her bed, woke at every slight shift in her breathing, and spoke softly to their unborn child every evening, as if the baby could already understand every word. On the morning they prepared to leave the hospital, Mrs. Lan stood at the doorway, watching her daughter and son-in-law with quiet pride. You two have been through enough, she said gently, adjusting the thin scarf around Tieu Lac's shoulders. Come home to the village when you're ready. The neighbors have already started clearing the garden, and I'll be there to help with anything you need. Tieu Lac smiled, reaching for her mother's hand. Thank you, Mom. We'll come back soon. Quan bowed slightly to his mother-in-law. We won't forget your kindness. The journey back to the village was quiet. Quan drove slowly, one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally reaching over to rest on Tieu Lac's knee. The countryside unfolded around them, golden rice fields swaying under the afternoon sun, the distant silhouette of bamboo groves. For the first time in weeks, the air felt lighter. When they arrived, the village welcomed them with gentle warmth. Neighbors had cleared the debris around the half-rebuilt house. The garden, though still recovering, showed new green shoots pushing through the soil. But the old gourd trellis lay in pieces, broken by the recent winds. That evening, after Tieu Lac had rested, Quan led her carefully to the center of the yard. The sky was painted in soft hues of orange and pink. He had already prepared a simple bamboo bench under the partial shade of a young mango tree. "Sit with me," he said, voice low and tender. Tieu Lac settled beside him, leaning her head against his shoulder. Quan wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. His free hand found its familiar place on her belly. For a long while they simply sat in silence, listening to the evening breeze rustling through the leaves and the distant call of birds returning to their nests. Then footsteps approached. Tieu Lac's brother appeared at the edge of the yard. He looked cleaner than before, clothes washed, hair combed, but his eyes still carried deep shadows of guilt. He stopped a respectful distance away, hands clasped tightly in front of him. Quan's body tensed instinctively. Tieu Lac felt it and gently squeezed his hand. Her brother took a deep breath and lowered himself to his knees on the dirt ground. "I know I don't deserve to be here," he began, voice hoarse. "What I did was unforgivable. I put your lives in danger for my own selfishness. Lac, I'm sorry for dragging you into my mess. Quan, I'm sorry for betraying the trust you tried to give me." Tears rolled down his face unchecked. "I've cut all ties with those people. I swear on my life, if you'll allow it, I'll stay in the village and help rebuild everything I helped destroy. I'll work every day until the debt is paid and the house is whole again. Just, please let me try to make things right." Silence stretched between them. Quan stared at the man kneeling before him. The rage was still there, simmering beneath his skin. But Tieu Lac's words from the hospital echoed in his mind. "I don't want our child to grow up in hatred." He felt her hand tighten around his. Quan exhaled slowly. He stood up, helping Tieu Lac rise with him. Together they walked over to her brother. "Stand up," Quan said quietly. There was no warmth in his voice yet, but the sharp edge of violence was gone. The brother rose on shaky legs. Quan looked him directly in the eyes. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for my wife and our child. They deserve a home without shadows hanging over it. You will work hard. You will stay away from trouble. And if you ever put my family in danger again..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Tieu Lac stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on her brother's arm. "We'll give you this chance. Not because you've earned it, but because we choose to believe in second chances. For the sake of the family we're building." Her brother nodded, tears falling faster. "Thank you, both of you. I won't waste this." As he walked away to begin clearing the broken trellis, Quan turned to Tieu Lac. The sunset painted her face in warm gold. She looked fragile yet radiant, carrying their future inside her. He pulled her into his arms, careful as always, and buried his face in her hair. "You amaze me every single day," he whispered. "Your heart is bigger than mine could ever be. I was ready to destroy him, but you showed me another way." Tieu Lac tilted her head up, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "We show each other the way. That's what marriage is, isn't it? Learning to be better together." Quan's gaze softened. He leaned down and captured her lips in a slow, lingering kiss. The kind that spoke of gratitude, of healing, of deep, abiding love. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "I sold the last piece of land today," he said quietly. "The money will cover a large part of the debt. Your brother will work off the rest with us. The house will rise again, stronger this time." Tieu Lac's eyes shimmered. "You gave up the last thing we had left. For peace. For you," he corrected gently. "For us. For our child. Nothing else matters anymore." Later that night, after a simple dinner shared with Mrs. Lan and a few close neighbors, Quan and Tieu Lac returned to the yard. The moon hung high, bathing everything in silver light. The air smelled of fresh earth and distant rain. Quan had worked quietly while Tieu Lac rested earlier. Several sturdy bamboo poles now stood upright, forming the skeleton of a new gourd trellis. It wasn't finished yet, but it was strong, stronger than the old one. He led her to the bench he had placed beneath it. "Close your eyes for a moment," he said softly. Tieu Lac smiled but obeyed, trusting him completely. Quan took both her hands in his, then slowly guided them to rest on her belly together with his own. "Now open them." When she did, she found him kneeling in front of her on one knee, eyes shining with emotion under the moonlight. "Lac, my love," he began, voice deep and steady. "I've faced fire, loss, and fear, but nothing has ever terrified me more than the thought of losing you and our child. You've taught me that true strength isn't in power or control. It's in love, in forgiveness, in choosing every day to protect what matters most." He leaned forward and pressed a reverent kiss to her belly, lingering there as if speaking directly to their baby. "Little one," he whispered against the fabric of her shirt, "your mother is the kindest soul I've ever known. She taught your father how to forgive when anger felt easier. She taught him how to love when fear tried to take over. I promise you, I will spend the rest of my life learning from her and loving both of you with everything I am." Tieu Lac's tears fell freely now. She cupped his face with both hands, drawing him up until he stood before her. Quan wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close. "I love you, Tieu Lac, not just for the woman you are today, but for the mother you're becoming and the wife who makes me want to be a better man every single morning." She rose onto her tiptoes, pressing her lips to his in a kiss filled with quiet passion and profound tenderness. The world around them seemed to fade. The broken house, the unfinished trellis, the lingering shadows of the past. In that moment, there was only the two of them and the new life growing between them. When they finally pulled apart, Tieu Lac rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "We'll finish the trellis together," she murmured, "and every evening we'll sit here, you, me, and our child. We'll watch the gourds grow, just like our family, slowly, steadily, reaching toward the light." Quan kissed the top of her head, his arms tightening around her. "Together, always." From a distance, her brother paused in his work, watching the tender scene under the moonlight. For the first time in months, a small spark of hope flickered in his eyes. He turned away quietly, picking up another bamboo pole, determined to prove his redemption through sweat and silence. The next morning, the village woke to the sound of steady hammering. Quan and Tieu Lac's brother worked side by side, awkward at first, then gradually finding rhythm. Mrs. Lan helped Tieu Lac prepare simple meals and herbal tonics. Neighbors brought fresh vegetables and words of encouragement. In the quiet moments between labor, Quan would find Tieu Lac resting under the partial trellis. He would sit beside her, place his hand on her belly, and speak of their future in that low, soothing voice she loved. One afternoon, as soft rain began to fall, they stayed under the half-finished shelter. Quan pulled Tieu Lac into his lap, wrapping his jacket around her shoulders to keep her warm. "Look at the rain," he whispered against her ear. "It washes everything clean, just like forgiveness." Tieu Lac turned in his arms, her fingers threading through his hair. "And love makes things grow again." He smiled, the first genuine, unguarded smile in weeks. Then he kissed her deeply, tasting rain and hope on her lips. The kiss was unhurried, filled with the quiet passion of two people who had walked through darkness and chosen to step into light together. As the rain softened, Quan rested his hand on her belly once more. "Our child will know only love here," he vowed. "No more fear, no more running, just us, building something beautiful from the ashes." Tieu Lac placed her hand over his. "And we'll teach them that love isn't perfect. It's choosing each other every single day, even when it's hard." Quan looked into her eyes, his gaze full of reverence and devotion. "Then I choose you," today, tomorrow, for all the days we have left. Under the gentle rain, with the new gourd trellis rising behind them and their child safe within her, Quan and Tieu Lac held each other close. The wounds of the past were still there, but they were healing, slowly, tenderly, wrapped in the kind of love that refuses to break. And in the quiet village, surrounded by green fields and the promise of new life, their story continued, not in grand gestures, but in the simple, profound moments of forgiveness, sacrifice, and unwavering devotion. A love reborn stronger than before.